What if I told you that the largest and most effective Soviet spy network operating inside Nazi Germany was run by a Luftwaffe intelligence officer who passed Hitler's most sensitive military secrets to Stalin for over 2 years before being caught? That this network, codenamed Rote Kapelle, Red Orchestra by the Gestapo, included German aristocrats, communist resistance fighters, and ordinary citizens who risked torture and execution to transmit information that changed the course of the Eastern Front? That when the Gestapo finally broke the network in 1942, they arrested over 600 people across Europe, executed dozens by guillotine and hanging, yet never realized the network had multiple independent cells that continued operating until the war's end? This is the story of the Red Orchestra, the spy ring that infiltrated the highest levels of Nazi Germany and proved that not all Germans supported Hitler. And the darkest part? The Western Allies knew about the network during the war, but did nothing to help because they didn't trust Soviet intelligence, condemning hundreds of brave resistors to torture and death. The Red Orchestra wasn't a single organization. It was a collection of loosely connected resistance and espionage groups operating across Nazi-occupied Europe, all ultimately feeding intelligence to Soviet military intelligence, the GRU. The Gestapo gave these disparate groups a single name, Rote Kapelle, because Rote, red, referred to communist affiliation, Kapelle, orchestra/chapel, was Gestapo slang for radio transmission networks. Radio operators were pianists. Transmitters were music boxes. But in reality, the Red Orchestra consisted of several independent networks that rarely knew about each other's existence. The ideological foundation. The people who joined Red Orchestra networks came from diverse backgrounds but shared common motivations. Anti-fascism. Many were communists or socialists who'd opposed Nazism from the beginning. They'd watched Hitler destroy German democracy, ban unions, and crush leftist opposition. Moral opposition. Some weren't communists but opposed Nazi racial policies, militarism, and totalitarianism on ethical grounds. German patriotism. Paradoxically, some saw resistance as patriotic. They believed Nazism was destroying Germany and that defeating Hitler would save their country. Personal loss. Some joined after witnessing Nazi atrocities, the persecution of Jews, the euthanasia program targeting disabled people, or the brutality of occupation policies. The networks formed organically, friends recruiting friends, family members recruiting relatives, colleagues recruiting trusted coworkers. This cellular structure made them resilient but also meant coordination was difficult. The Soviet connection, Soviet military intelligence, GRU, had operated spy networks in Europe since the 1920s. When Hitler came to power in 1933, the Soviets prioritized intelligence gathering on Nazi Germany. The GRU recruited German communists who'd fled to Moscow after 1933, Soviet intelligence officers posing as diplomats or businessmen, sympathetic foreigners willing to spy on Nazi Germany. These recruiters made contact with anti-Nazi Germans and gradually built networks. By 1939, multiple Soviet intelligence networks operated in Germany, German-occupied territories, and neutral countries bordering Germany. When Germany invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941, these networks became critical. Soviet military intelligence desperately needed information about German military capabilities, plans, and movements. The Red Orchestra networks would provide exactly that. The Red Orchestra included hundreds of participants, but several individuals were particularly significant. Haro Schulze-Boysen. Schulze-Boysen was the most improbable Soviet spy imaginable. Born into Prussian aristocracy in 1909, initially a nationalist who published right-wing literature, became disillusioned with Nazism after SA thugs beat him severely in 1933, joined the Luftwaffe, German Air Force, and rose to lieutenant. Worked in the Luftwaffe's intelligence department, Reichsluftfahrtministerium, with access to highly classified information. By 1940, Schulze-Boysen had complete access to Luftwaffe deployment information, knowledge of German Air Force capabilities and limitations, information about planned operations, connections throughout the German military and government. He began passing information to Soviet intelligence, including details of Operation Barbarossa before the invasion, Luftwaffe order of battle, German aircraft production figures, strategic bombing plans. Schulze-Boysen's wife, Libertas Schulze-Boysen, worked at the German Film Archive and used her position to gather intelligence and distribute anti-Nazi propaganda. Together, they ran one of the Red Orchestra's most productive cells, recruiting approximately 50 to 60 members from Berlin's intellectual and government circles. Arvid Harnack. Harnack was another unlikely Soviet agent. Born 1901 into an academic family, earned doctorate in economics, worked in the German economics ministry, had access to economic intelligence about German war production, resource allocation, and strategic planning. Harnack's wife, Mildred Fish Harnack, an American citizen, taught English and American literature at Berlin University while helping coordinate the network. Harnack's group focused on economic intelligence, data that revealed Germany's industrial capacity, weaknesses in the war economy, and production bottlenecks. This information was crucial for Soviet strategic planning. Leopold Trepper. Trepper was a professional GRU intelligence officer. Born in Poland in 1904, trained in Moscow in espionage tradecraft, operated under various cover identities across Europe, ran networks in Belgium, France, and Switzerland. Trepper's network operated independently of the Berlin groups, but shared the Red Orchestra designation. His cells focused on German military deployments in Western Europe, Atlantic Wall fortifications, German war industry in occupied territories, economic intelligence from German-controlled zones. Sandor Rado, operating from Switzerland, neutral territory, ran another major Red Orchestra network. Hungarian-born geographer and cartographer, established a press agency and map-making business as cover, recruited sources across Europe who traveled to Switzerland, operated one of the most productive intelligence-gathering operations of the war. Rado's network sent thousands of reports to Moscow, including detailed maps of German military positions, industrial facilities, and transportation infrastructure. What made the Red Orchestra network so valuable was the quality of intelligence they provided. Operation Barbarossa. Warning: in spring 1941, multiple Red Orchestra sources reported that Germany was preparing to invade the Soviet Union. Schulze-Boysen provided Luftwaffe deployment information, showing massive buildup near Soviet borders. Other sources reported troop movements, logistics preparations, and strategic planning. The intelligence was detailed, accurate, and urgent. Soviet intelligence forwarded these warnings to Stalin. Stalin ignored them. Despite overwhelming evidence from the Red Orchestra and other sources, Stalin refused to believe Germany would attack. He dismissed the warnings as British disinformation designed to provoke Soviet-German conflict. When Germany invaded on June 22, 1941, the Soviet Union was catastrophically unprepared. Despite having received accurate advance warning from its own intelligence networks, the Red Orchestra had been right, Stalin had been wrong, and millions would die because of that miscalculation. Battle of Kursk, July 1943. After the war began, the Red Orchestra's intelligence became operationally crucial. Before the Battle of Kursk, the largest tank battle in history, Red Orchestra sources provided detailed information about German offensive plans, the exact date of the German attack, German order of battle, which units, which commanders, which sectors, information about new German tank models, Tiger and Panther tanks. This intelligence allowed Soviet forces to prepare defensive positions exactly where Germans would attack, pre-position reserves, build layered defenses in depth, launch spoiling attacks to disrupt German preparations. The Soviet victory at Kursk was partly attributable to superior intelligence, much of it from Red Orchestra sources. Economic intelligence. Harnack's economic intelligence revealed German synthetic fuel production capacity, showing Germany's vulnerability to oil shortages, bottlenecks in German war production, shortages of critical materials like rubber and rare metals, labor shortages and productivity issues. This information helped Soviet planners understand German strategic vulnerabilities and predict when Germany's war economy would begin failing. Technological intelligence. Red Orchestra sources provided information about German technological developments. V-weapon programs, V-1 flying bomb and V-2 rocket, German submarine designs, aircraft development, radar systems. This intelligence allowed Soviet military planners to anticipate German capabilities and develop countermeasures. Throughout 1941 and early 1942, the Gestapo knew Soviet intelligence networks were operating in Germany, but struggled to penetrate them. The network's cellular structure made them resistant to infiltration. Members knew only a few other members, so capturing one person didn't expose the entire organization. But in summer 1942, the Gestapo got their break. The radio direction finding. German counterintelligence had developed sophisticated radio direction finding equipment that could locate clandestine transmitters. By monitoring radio frequencies and triangulating signals, the Gestapo identified multiple illegal transmitters operating in Berlin and surrounding areas. This didn't immediately reveal who was transmitting or what information was being sent. The transmissions were encrypted. But it gave the Gestapo geographic locations to investigate. The first arrests, August to September 1942. The Gestapo began surveillance of areas where illegal transmissions originated. On August 30th, 1942, they raided an apartment and arrested several Red Orchestra members, including radio operators. During interrogation, which included torture, some prisoners revealed information about other network members. The arrests cascaded. Each arrest led to more names. Each interrogation revealed more connections. The Gestapo worked systematically through the network. The Schulze-Boysen arrest, August 31st, 1942. Gestapo agents arrested Haro Schulze-Boysen at his Luftwaffe office. They also arrested his wife, Libertas. The arrest of Schulze-Boysen was a disaster for the network. As a central node, he knew dozens of other members across multiple cells. The Harnack arrest, September 7, 1942. Arvid Harnack and Mildred Fish Harnack were arrested days later. By mid-September 1942, the Gestapo had arrested over 120 people connected to the Berlin Red Orchestra networks. The interrogations. Gestapo interrogation methods were brutal. Sleep deprivation, beatings, torture, including electrical shocks and simulated drowning, threats against family members, psychological manipulation. Some prisoners broke under torture and provided information. Others resisted despite extreme suffering. The interrogations revealed the scope of the networks. The Gestapo was shocked to discover that Soviet intelligence had penetrated the Luftwaffe, the Economics Ministry, and multiple other German institutions. The trials. The Gestapo wanted public trials to demonstrate they'd crushed Soviet espionage, deter others from spying, humiliate the defendants, prove the effectiveness of Nazi security services. The Reichskriegsgericht, Reich Court-Martial, tried the defendants in closed sessions in late 1942. The verdicts were predetermined. Nearly everyone arrested was sentenced to death. Content warning. This section contains descriptions of executions. Between December 1942 and August 1943, the Nazi regime executed approximately 50 members of the Berlin Red Orchestra networks. Execution methods. Hanging. Most male defendants were sentenced to death by hanging. Executions were carried out at Plötzensee prison in Berlin. Prisoners were hanged from meat hooks in an execution chamber. The process was deliberately slow and agonizing. Some executions were filmed for Hitler to watch. Bodies were cremated and ashes scattered. Guillotine. Female defendants were typically executed by guillotine. This included Libertas Schulze-Boysen, executed December 22, 1942, age 29. Mildred Fish Harnack, executed February 16, 1943, age 40, the only American woman executed under direct Hitler order. Dozens of other women involved in the networks. The final letters. Many condemned prisoners wrote final letters to family members before execution. These letters, some of which survived, reveal extraordinary courage. Hardo Schulze-Boysen's final letter. I am entirely calm and ask you to be the same. In a few hours it will all be over. I know that death is waiting in the next room, but the thought is very far removed from my mind. I am almost happy. For what is the inevitable outcome? That on this same soil where we now go to meet our end, a new and better Germany will rise. Arvid Harnack's final letter. I die as I lived, convinced that from our deaths, a beautiful future will grow. My last thoughts are with you and with Germany. Mildred Fish Harnack's final words reportedly, I loved Germany so much. These letters demonstrate that many Red Orchestra members believed their deaths would contribute to Germany's eventual liberation from Nazism. The American citizen, Mildred Fish Harnack's execution created a particular tragedy. She was an American citizen, born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin in 1902, who'd moved to Germany in 1929 with her German husband. The U.S. State Department was aware of her arrest and conviction but made minimal efforts to intervene. The U.S. and Germany were at war, complicating diplomatic efforts. State Department officials were reluctant to advocate for someone convicted of espionage for the Soviet Union. Anti-communist sentiment in the U.S. government meant little sympathy for Soviet spies. Even American ones, Mildred's family in America, learned of her execution only after the war ended. Despite the catastrophic losses in Berlin, other Red Orchestra networks continued operating. The Belgian/French networks. Leopold Trepper. Trepper's networks in occupied Western Europe survived the 1942 crackdown. When Trepper learned of the Berlin arrests, he went into deep cover, cut contact with compromised members, restructured his networks to eliminate weak points, continued transmitting intelligence to Moscow. Trepper was eventually arrested by the Gestapo in November 1942, but he pretended to cooperate while actually providing disinformation, escaped from Gestapo custody in September 1943, survived in hiding until Paris was liberated in August 1944. His networks provided intelligence on German Atlantic Wall fortifications, V weapon launching sites, German military strength in France, economic intelligence from occupied territories. The Swiss networks, Zandor Rado. Rado's networks in Switzerland operated throughout the war because Switzerland was neutral, making Gestapo operations there difficult. Rado had established excellent security procedures. Swiss authorities tolerated Soviet intelligence operations, while also tolerating German intelligence. Rado's networks provided continuous intelligence until 1943, when Swiss authorities, under German pressure, began cracking down on intelligence operations. Rado fled Switzerland and eventually reached Soviet territory, though he was imprisoned by Stalin's paranoid security services for several years after the war. The independent cells. Because Red Orchestra networks were cellular and loosely coordinated, many small groups continued operating even after major arrests. Individual agents kept reporting. Local resistance cells maintained contact with Soviet intelligence. New networks formed to replace destroyed ones. The Gestapo never completely destroyed Soviet intelligence networks in Germany. They just forced them deeper underground. The post-war reckoning. After the war, surviving Red Orchestra members faced complicated situations. In Soviet-occupied zones, some were honored as heroes of the resistance. Others were imprisoned by Stalin's paranoid security services, which suspected anyone who'd survived Gestapo interrogation might have been turned. Some were executed by Soviet intelligence based on false accusations of treason. In Western-occupied zones, Red Orchestra members received minimal recognition. Anti-communist sentiment in the West meant Soviet spies weren't celebrated, even when they'd fought Nazis. Some were investigated by Western intelligence services as potential Soviet agents in West Germany. Recognition came very slowly. The West German government was reluctant to honor communists. Not until the 1980s to 1990s did Germany begin officially recognizing Red Orchestra members as legitimate resistance fighters. The Red Orchestra raises several important questions about espionage, resistance, and historical memory. Question 1. How effective was the intelligence? The intelligence provided by Red Orchestra networks was accurate and detailed, strategically valuable, economic intelligence, order of battle, sometimes tactically crucial, Kursk. But Stalin often ignored warnings, Barbarossa. The impact is difficult to measure precisely. Some intelligence arrived too late to be actionable. Most historians conclude the Red Orchestra provided some of the war's best intelligence on Nazi Germany, but Soviet command's failures meant the intelligence wasn't always used effectively. Question 2. Were they heroes or traitors? This depends entirely on perspective. German nationalist view, they were traitors who betrayed their country to a foreign power during wartime. Anti-fascist view, they were heroes who resisted an evil regime and tried to save Germany from Nazism. Soviet view during the war, they were valuable intelligence assets. Soviet view after the war, they were suspect because some survived interrogation, suggesting possible collaboration. Modern German view, gradually shifting toward recognition as legitimate resistance fighters who opposed Nazism on principle. Question 3. Why aren't they better known? The Red Orchestra is less famous than other resistance movements because they were communists, making them unpalatable to Western narratives during the Cold War. They spied rather than engaged in armed resistance. Less dramatic than fighting, many were executed, leaving few survivors to tell their stories. Post-war Soviet treatment of survivors discouraged discussion. The cellular structure meant few participants knew the full scope of the networks. Question 4. What's their legacy? The Red Orchestra demonstrated that significant German resistance to Nazism existed. That resistance came from across the political spectrum, not just communists, but one that ordinary people could make extraordinary contributions. That espionage could be as valuable as armed resistance. Their legacy is complicated by ideology, but their courage is undeniable. Today, there are memorials to Red Orchestra members in Berlin, a memorial at Plötzensee prison where many were executed, a plaque at the former Luftwaffe headquarters where Schulze-Boysen worked, streets named after prominent members, museum exhibits documenting their resistance but recognition came late, decades after their deaths and remains incomplete. The Red Orchestra fought a quiet war. No battlefield heroics, no dramatic last stands, no glorious charges. Just people gathering information, transmitting coded messages, and risking torture and death to undermine the regime they lived under. Haro Schulze-Boysen worked in the Luftwaffe intelligence department. Every day he went to an office in Nazi Germany's Air Force headquarters. He had access to some of the war's most sensitive secrets. And every evening, he went home and prepared reports for Soviet intelligence. For 2 years, he lived this double life. Nazi officer by day, Soviet spy by night. When the Gestapo finally caught him, they hanged him from a meat hook. He was 33 years old. Mildred Fish Harnack taught English literature in Berlin. She was an American citizen who loved German culture and married a German economist. She helped her husband pass economic intelligence to Soviet intelligence while teaching students about American literature. The Gestapo guillotined her. She was 40 years old. The Red Orchestra never had a chance to win the war themselves. They were spies, not soldiers. They transmitted information. They didn't fight battles. But the information they transmitted helped the Soviet Union survive 1941, prepare for Kursk, understand German vulnerabilities, and plan operations. Did their intelligence change the war's outcome? Probably not decisively. The Soviet Union's industrial capacity and manpower advantages were more important. But did their intelligence save lives? Absolutely. Every accurate warning, every piece of intelligence about German plans, every revelation of German weaknesses, all of it helped Soviet commanders make better decisions. And decisions in war mean the difference between soldiers living and dying. The Red Orchestra couldn't stop the war, but they shortened it, even if only by days. And in a war where tens of thousands died daily, shortening it by even days meant thousands of lives saved. If this story moved you, if it made you think about resistance, about espionage, about the Germans who opposed Hitler, hit that subscribe button. The Red Orchestra fought in the shadows. They transmitted in code. They died quietly, without fanfare, executed in prison yards and chambers. But they mattered. They resisted. They fought. And the orchestra played on, even after the Gestapo thought they'd silenced it forever.